Close the door, keep out the storm. Far away, far away.
Thank you again for tuning in to Witches of the Moon. I am your Thursday hostess, Natalie. This week's topic is reputable authors. And this is a very interesting topic for a lot of reasons. And I know I say that every week. Interesting topic. We try to keep the topics interesting. The reason that I find this particular topic so interesting is that it is such a subjective sort of thing. When you're talking about who is reputable within the community and who is not, a lot of that is based on people's ideas about the people that they're reading or seeing. I know that some authors give information about themselves as far as their background, how long they've been practicing, what type of path they're on, but really what makes one person more reputable than another. Reputation is based on what people have to say about you. So just because you're reputable doesn't necessarily mean that you're always right, that you're right even 90% of the time, that you're ever right. And it doesn't mean that you're, not right or wrong. That's one of the things about this path that I think is so very interesting, is that to me there isn't really a right or wrong way to this path. And what I have noticed with a lot of the authors is that they give a lot of their own opinion or the teachings that they have heard that they've taken on into their craft. Sometimes that gets translated into, you should do this, you shouldn't do that. It has to be done this particular way. If it's not done this way, it's not right. And what I'm talking about is when you get an author who perceives themselves as being reputable, somebody who is recognized within the community, and I don't want to name any particular names at this point. I'll talk about some authors I have read in a minute, but what I've noticed with some of these authors is that they think that their path is the only right path and that they've got their own sense of morality, and their sense of morality therefore ought to apply to everybody because this is the way it is in the universe. And I have a little bit of issue with that because not everybody sees everything the way you do. That's one of the things about this path I like. Now, I'm not talking about going out and killing people, or making hateful speeches against somebody or something like that. That's obviously wrong. I mean, there are just some things that are wrong. I'm talking about using magic to defend yourself or to right a wrong that's been done to you. And I see a lot of preachy, what I consider preachy kinds of things about that in some of the authors that you'll read, particularly if they're Wiccan in nature. Not that I'm disparaging Wiccans, because I mean they're obviously good people and they want good to be the prevailing emotion here, but I believe in something other than, I believe we're witches. We have the right to defend ourselves. We have a right to set our magic or ask the universe to intervene in something. Well, I won't go into that because that's a different topic. But I would caution you against just taking something at face value. Anything that you read within the craft at face value, regardless of who's writing it. That being said, that's my little soapbox about reputable authors. Now, what I want to do is spend the rest of this video talking about different types of authors I've read, people I've read, what I think of their books in terms of what I gained from it, what I didn't gain from it, and here's my opinion on this too. Regardless of who the author is, you can take something from what they write. It doesn't matter to me if there's somebody who's reputable, they've been invited to several panels at several different witchy conferences or what have you. They're going to be talking at Hex Fest, or, they're serving on this panel or that panel for this, Fairy Con or whatever, Pixie Con or whatever you want to call it. So that being said, I just want to say that there are a lot of really good authors out there, and I have learned a lot from reading a lot of different people's perspectives and learning from their craft and what they do. Not all of it do I agree with, not all of it do I espouse, and not all of it did I take into my personal practice. But I learned something from everyone that I read, whether I agreed with it or not. I learned about somebody else's perspective or what have you. So that being said, let's talk about a few of the people that are out there. As you saw on the wonderful graphic that Erin created for us for this week, she has 3 prominent authors listed on there. The one on the left is Raven Grimassi, the one in the middle is Raymond Buckland, and the third one was Timothy Roderick. Now, I'm a little biased because Raymond Buckland was the first actual book about this path in a positive light that I read. So Raymond Buckland holds a strong part in my heart, because although I don't necessarily espouse everything he says either, I did learn a tremendous amount from Big Blue. That's the nickname for his book, The Complete Book of Witchcraft by Raymond Buckland. Sorry. I'm going to talk about Raven Grimassi in a minute. I actually did a review on his The Witch's Craft on my personal channel, so and I apologize if I seem like I'm antsy or moving. I'm in my office up in Pilot Point, Texas today, and I'm in the therapy room. So the benches here they have no cushions on them, and my skin is sticking because it's been remarkably humid here. So wearing my shorts and my skin's sticking to the bottom of the seat, so I apologize. But anyway, Raymond Buckland holds a special place in my heart. I wrote him and told him that his book changed my life because it gave me a whole new perspective, and it gave me the verbiage that I needed to defend my path. Not that you necessarily need to defend your path, but remember that I'm coming from a Judeo-Christian upbringing. And when I became Catholic, my mother was very, 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 very unhappy about it, and happy enough to call CPS and try to have my child taken away from me because she did not want her raised Catholic. She said some pretty horrific stuff about my husband and about me trying to gain custody of my daughter at the time. Her opinion is that Catholics are evil, idol-worshipping Satan lovers and might as well march themselves to hell right now, because that's exactly where they're going. But they have a concept in the Catholic Church called defenders of the faith, or defending the faith, or being an apologetic. Now, apologetic meaning one who can argue, not one who apologizes for the faith. And I don't want people to get that confused. An apologist for the Catholic faith is one who defends the faith, who is versed in the Bible well enough and in the Catechism of the Catholic Church well enough to defend it against somebody else who is speaking against it. And I was actually studying to be an apologist because I felt very drawn to the Catholic faith from the beginning. And I think what it is about the Catholic faith I really liked was the unity. And they have a lot of reputable authors as well, but if you don't accept that the Bible, is the true word of God, then, then what they say doesn't matter. And I kind of feel that way about a lot of the authors in the craft. Raymond Buckland, his book is excellent, an excellent guide for starting out with practice. Now, that particular book is geared more towards coven practice. He does have another book about solitary practice, as does... I just blanked on his name, and I've got Scott Cunningham. Scott Cunningham is considered also a very reputable author in the field, but I have seen some contradictions in some of what he writes. I mean, there are some things where he says you can't substitute anything for this, and there's other areas where he says you can. He has done a lot of books on herbalism and herbal aromatherapy and use of herbs in the craft, and I know that he was quite well respected up until the time of his death, and now even after. I have a lot of respect for Scott Cunningham. He's written prolifically for the craft, and I see him as a person who most likely had a very gentle nature. That being said, I mean, there are some contradictions in some of the writings that he has if you dig deep enough, but again, you take what you can get from what you read, and you let the rest of it go. There are people who talk a lot about Raven Silverwolf. I'm not sure if I'm getting her name right. There are people who love her, and there are people who think she's too frou-frou, fluffy. I have never actually read any of her works. I know that she wrote a book geared specifically towards teens who were interested in a path in the craft, and I think some of the arguments I heard regarding that book were that she basically tells them, if your parents aren't supportive, keep it a secret. Practice, but don't tell them you're doing it, or something along those lines. Now, again, I haven't actually read any of her books, but Silver Ravenwolf. That's her name, Silver Ravenwolf, I believe. So, not Raven, Silver Wolf. There's so many ravens in the craft. But I don't know that I wouldn't get something from her books, and I have been curious about buying them. In all honesty, when I was first starting on the path, and some of the things that I read, about her readings, things that people who had read her books, they weren't necessarily formal reviews of her books. And here's the thing about reviews is sometimes you'll get reviews that are all positive. That's all you see is the positive. Oh, this person's great. This is a wonderful work. Very enlightening. Da 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 da. Especially if you're reading them from the author or people who supported the author. So I prefer, if I'm going to go based on what I hear in reviews, I like to see what people who've read the book say about it. Not necessarily people who were paid to write an endorsement for the book or write a review for the book. So people who are just general lay of the land, people who've read the book, what they think. And I'd heard positive and negative. It seems to me that there's nobody that's middle of the road with her. Either they love her or they can't stand her for whatever reason. So I kind of stayed away from reading a lot of her books. Now, Raven Grimassi is another author who's very well known. He's been on a lot of panels. I know he's spoken at Hexfest before with Christian Day and Brian, whatever his name is. And I agree with some of his concepts. I think that he tries to convince people that witchcraft started in Italy, is fully a thing of Italy, and has nothing to do with anything outside of Italy. Or Greco-Italian influences, that no other witchcraft existed prior to that. That's the impression I get from his writing, particularly in that book. Now, it could be that, maybe that was his perspective, or he was just trying to show the history as it was in Europe, and perhaps for European witchcraft that's true. My concern with that is that around the times that he's referencing in that book, The Witch's Craft, he's talking about things. He doesn't ever talk about what was going on in other countries at the time, because I happen to know for a fact that the Druids were using magic in the Celtic world around the same time. And at some point, these things kind of met and clashed and what have you. So again, you don't have to agree with everything that an author has to say. Now, he's a good writer. He has a lot of history behind his work. It's well researched. And when I'm looking for somebody that I consider reputable, or somebody that I want to learn more from, that's kind of what I look for. I'm a PhD student, so I'm very research minded. I look at how well referenced are their sources, where do their sources come from. I don't like authors, and I would caution anybody against putting a lot of stock into an author that can't back up where they're getting their information from. Now, that being said, witchcraft is very, very old, and not everything has a source. Some people just make things on their own. They tweak it to suit their own path, and so they may write about that, and that's fine as long as they state that that's what they're doing, that this is, an idea I came up with, this is da 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 da. Because if they're saying you have to do it this way, and again, I would caution you against anybody that says that too. Anytime somebody says you must do it this way, that's very dogmatic to me, and I think that you want to kind of take that with a grain of salt, so to speak. You get your salt circle going. No joke. Just kind of watch that stuff. Take it, but don't necessarily run with it. Because again, this is a path that's very, very personal. Your spirituality is your spirituality. So no matter how many reputable authors you read, they could be top of their in the practice. They could be very well respected by hundreds of thousands of witches across the world. But if it doesn't resonate with you, it doesn't do you any good. So there'll be things that you connect with, and there'll be things that you'll be like, this is shite. And if you think it's shite, stick with shite. Other authors that are considered reputable, obviously, the three, like I said, that were on there. Timothy Roderick, I'm biased, he's a friend of mine. That's another area of bias I have to declare. I've spoken to him quite a bit on not just about witchcraft. The man has a master's degree in educational psychology, and I've asked him about resources for clients particularly my dyslexic kids, because educational psychologists work with dyslexia, so he has guided me to some sources. So I have a kind of a personal relationship with that author. But again, he's Wiccan and I'm not Wiccan. So some of the things that he teaches, that he says, I don't want to say he says it's law, but things that he kind of presents to you as this is how it is in the craft, I don't necessarily agree with. And I love him deeply. He's a great man. He is a wonderful, wonderful, very gentle-souled man. I think he's a deeply spiritual person. I love to read his writings. I learn a lot. I did his, there was a group on Facebook last year. It started in, I believe, November or the end of October. I think we started on Samhain last year, and I was kind of hoping to do that again this year. But it was a year and a day study, and we used his book, Wicca, a year and a day, 365 days of study in the craft of the wise. It's a long title. But I did learn a lot from that process. Again, I'm not Wiccan, but I learned a lot from going through those steps and the exercises that he had in there, and by sharing my experiences with you all through video on my personal channel, through the group that was on Facebook, because we had a discussion group on Facebook, and I did grow a lot spiritually from that. I learned a lot through that, and I really enjoyed it. And I'm looking forward to the next year, because we have another group started on Facebook, a year and a day, second year. And as soon as his new book comes out, it was supposed to come out like in November, and then it got pushed to January, and now it's been pushed to this November. So it is available for pre-order on Amazon.com. It's called Wicca, the Second Year, Another Year of Practice in the Craft of the Wise, something like that. If you just go onto Amazon and you put in Timothy Roderick Wicca, it'll probably pull up both books for you. And I recommend both because they're just good staple stock things to have in your library. Now, I am, again, a research-minded person, so I like to buy books, keep them, whether I like them, agree with them. It's very rare for me to part with a book, because to me it's always a resource. Whether I will actually use a lot of what's in that, maybe not, but maybe some of the thinking I might refer to for something else at some point. So I like to keep a lot of books in my library. I have several other authors that I don't know how reputable they are, but they're authors that I've enjoyed reading. There are several books on Druidism that I like to read. There's one by Amber Wolf that I'm reading right now that's actually a really interesting read, and it's strictly about the power of the Druid, using Druidic power in your craft. And I'm finding that very interesting, very enlightening, and very thrilling to read. And some of it I'm incorporating, and some of it I'm kind of going, I wonder where she got that from. But again, look for the authors that can source where they're getting their things from. And if it's something that they've created from their own mind, they need to tell you that. That to me is the sign of a reputable author. Somebody who can flat out tell you, this is my path, this is what I'm thinking, I'm writing this from my perspective, but take from it what you will. I don't like authors who are preachy, that you must do this and it's only done this way and what have you. Now, going back for a moment to the book by Raven Grimassi, The Witch's Craft, that was one of the things that he argues for in that particular book, and I kind of agree with him to an extent. One of the things he was saying is that, yes, we all have different paths, we all have different steps that we take on this path, but there are certain core things that are witchy, basically, and it's those core things that you don't want to stray too far from, or you're no longer practicing as a witch. Maybe so. I can kind of see what he's saying, and I understand what he means, and it's that core that gives us our moral center and our morality and our unity within the craft, and I kind of agree with that. But he's talking more about, I think from what I interpreted from the book, more about how we consecrate, utilize tools, certain ceremonies that we do, not necessarily the Sabbats or the Sabbats, but generally our interactions with deity. And to an extent, I kind of agree with that, and I really took a lot of his methodology, so to speak, for consecrating tools, preparing myself for spell casting, ritual, and casting spells. I'm of the idea that if you are a witch, you cast almost on a daily notion. It may not necessarily be a big formal spell where you have your cauldron and your athame or your wand or both and you're, there's fire. Not necessarily. Casting can be something as simple as, like I said in one of my other videos, I would put little sigils on my daughter's sandwiches with the mustard, and I would just simply ask, in a little benediction for protection from the god and goddess for her. I think what I would do is I would draw the symbol of the god, which is this, the circle with the horn, and then I would put the goddess, the triple moon, and I would put a pentacle in the center, and as I was doing that, I would say, by Lord and by Lady protected she, as I will it, so mote it be. That's casting. And to an extent, I agree. I think that when you are truly a witch and you're practicing the craft, not just being a magical person or practicing magic or sorcery or being pagan, because I think there is a difference between being pagan and being witch. I think that your connection to the universe is such that your very thoughts can be spells. You're casting. If you even think something, it could be casting a spell. So, and that's why we have to be cautious. We as witches, we recognize that words and thoughts have power, that what is here manifests here. So, and he was kind of that mind, and I tend to agree with that. But I realize this has been kind of a rambly, weird sort of video, but basically my stance on reputable authors is that every author is reputable to an extent. Be cautious of those that are preachy, that tell you must do things a certain way. Don't let that influence your thinking. If it does not resonate with you, then don't adopt that practice. If it seems to have some meaning for you or make some sense, then use it. Don't let the name or the idea that this person is reputable be of so strong an influence to you that you override your own instinct for your craft. Your craft and your spirituality and your relationship with deity and on this path is yours and yours alone. No author can tell you how you should practice, but learn from them. They all have excellent ideas. Christopher, I always have trouble with his last name. I don't know if it's pronounced Pensek or Penchik, but he is also very reputable. But he's one of those that I kind of read and go, okay, I get that. That's cool. And sometimes I go, really? It comes off somewhat dogmatic to me, or kind of holier than thou, and I hate to say that, but he has got a lot of wonderful, wonderful, wonderful ideas and thoughts, and he has studied a lot, and he's studied a lot of various paths, which to me gives him some credence. But really, putting a pen to paper, it in and of itself doesn't make you reputable, but feeling that you're better than other witches doesn't make you reputable either. So again, that almost sounded a little contradictory to what I said earlier about every author is reputable in their own right. If you're taking your time and to share your studies and your knowledge with somebody, then there's some level of reputation there anyway, is what I mean by that. So don't always put full stock into everything you read. Know that there are authors that people are going to rave about and authors that people are going to say, that was just shite, it was crap, and I can't believe I read it and spent my money on it. Some places, sometimes like on Amazon, you can get like a little preview. If you go over to the side, it'll say click to look inside. Sometimes I recommend doing that. Sometimes just those little snippets give you an idea if that author's writing style, first of all, isn't going to bore you into absolute sleep, or if that book is going to contain information. Sometimes it's not enough. Sometimes you need a little bit more than just that. So there may be other ways to go about it. Some of the things that I like to do too sometimes is look into book exchanges. Well, I hate to part with books, like I said, and I hate letting go of anything that's in my library, but I have on occasion done some book exchanges with somebody where I said, hey, I read this book. It was okay, but I wasn't jazzed about it. I don't necessarily feel it needs to stay a part of my permanent library. Would you be willing to trade something? And there's a lot of groups on Facebook for that. So that's also a good way. Start a discussion group with people or on Facebook about reputable authors. call it witchy authors or something, and see if you can't get other people involved to help you locate people that other people have learned from. But again, as with anything in this craft, research it for yourself. If it doesn't make sense to you, don't feel that you have to live by it. If it makes sense to you, don't be afraid to adopt it just because this person is or isn't a well-known author or person within the craft. So that would be my best advice to you regarding reputable authors. There are many, 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 many people. Just the few that I've named here are a drop in the bucket to people who've written things. Go to Llewellyn's website, and that's Llewellyn, Llewellyn Publishers. They just in general have published a lot of really good stuff, and some of it is from people that I've never even heard of, but I learn a lot from it. People like DJ Conway, that she's known, but she's not as well known as some of the other authors, I think. Lots of people. So learn from it, take what you can from it, and run with it. And maybe one day become one of those reputable authors yourself. I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you for sharing your week with me. Blessed be, and keep reading.